Ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Where the inspiring words on the company website or maybe the mission statement on the wall just don't quite match what's actually happening day to day.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really common experience, I think.
Like maybe you have a really clear picture, a vision
Yeah.
of where you want your team or organization to go, but the way things operate just seems to pull you in a completely different direction.
Mm-hmm. Or you feel like you're constantly in translation mode, trying to convert your core beliefs, your values, into real actions, but somehow it just never quite lands.
Exactly. Well, let's dive straight into this disconnect today because we're tackling what the source material calls cultural misalignment. It's a really core issue.
It really is. And what's fascinating from the source we're looking at today, executives compass leading change. Strategic vision and culture transmutation, specifically Pillar 3, Guidepost 1,
Mhm.
is that the problem often isn't, a bad vision,
Right. It's not that the idea isn't good.
or even that people don't want to do the right thing. Instead, this guidepost points to something deeper, more systemic. It suggests the organization itself, as a whole system, can be working against those stated goals.
Yeah, that's a key shift in perspective. It's less about blaming individuals and more about looking at the underlying structure, the environment.
Precisely.
And as we've probably all experienced, you can't just lecture your way out of this problem, can you?
Definitely not. Another big speech, another all-hands email. It's just not going to magically fix ways of working that are, well, deeply ingrained.
So this is where the guidepost introduces a really powerful idea, culture transmutation.
hmm And it's deliberately not called just change or adjustment. Transmutation implies something
Okay.
more fundamental. Exactly. A fundamental, lasting shift in how the organization operates at its core energy, its purpose, its behaviors. Think of it maybe like changing the actual engine of a car, not just, giving it a new paint job.
Okay, I like that analogy. So the aim is for your vision to become the natural rhythm, the sort of unconscious way things function within your leadership environment.
That's the goal. It's embedded.
Transmutation.
Yeah.
Okay. So our mission in this deep dive, as we unpack this guidepost 1 from Pillar 3, is to really get under the skin of how you bridge that gap between a compelling vision and the sometimes frustrating everyday reality of the culture.
We're talking about making changes that are really baked in, right? Not just bolted on the side.
Exactly. Let's start by maybe making that feeling of misalignment a bit more concrete. The guidepost gives us a story, an example of a leader. Malcolm, right? Tell us about his situation.
Yeah, Malcolm. So he's a VP of nursing, and he has this really powerful, quite inspiring vision. He wants equitable care for every single patient.
Sounds great.
And he wants to empower his nurses through shared decision-making, drive compassionate innovation. I mean, it's exactly what you'd hope for in healthcare leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground was,
Starkly different, according to the guidepost. His nursing team. They were described as exhausted, disengaged, and really just sticking rigidly to the old ways of doing things. Cautious.
okay, so vision meets reality, and reality is pushing back hard.
Hmm.
What were those old ways? The guidepost mentions specific cultural norms.
It does. And these are often the unspoken rules, right? The things people just know. In Malcolm's case, it was things like, don't challenge the process, just follow the steps.
Stay in your lane.
Exactly. Don't step outside your defined role. And maybe the most common one, keep your head down, don't make waves.
Wow. Those kinds of invisible boundaries, they can absolutely stifle any attempt at progress or innovation, can't they?
Completely. And like many leaders facing this kind of resistance, Malcolm's first instinct, as the guidepost describes it, was basically to communicate more and harder.
Right. The usual playbook, passionate presentations, all-staff emails, town hall meetings.
All the standard approaches, but, and this is the crucial point the guidepost makes, nothing actually changed. The culture didn't budge.
Why not? What was the fundamental reason it wasn't working?
Because the underlying systems, the actual infrastructure of how things got done, none of it supported the vision he was promoting.
Can you give an example of those systems?
Sure. The guidepost points out things like decision-making. It was still very top-down, even though he was talking about shared leadership.
Ah, okay, so the talk didn't match the walk.
Exactly. And getting new ideas approved. It involved navigating layers of bureaucracy, recognition, often tied to seniority or just, sticking to the rules, rather than innovation or embodying the new values he wanted.
So his message, no matter how inspiring or well-intentioned, was essentially hitting this brick wall of established processes and norms.
Precisely. The system wasn't built for his vision.
And the guidepost is pretty clear about the costs of this kind of disconnect, this misalignment. It's not just frustrating, it's damaging.
Very damaging. It talks about the immediate skepticism that greets any new initiative, that collective eye roll of, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, vision fatigue, I've heard that term.
That's it. People get so used to initiatives fizzling out that they tune out, they disengage.
And it mentions frontline leaders becoming disconnected from the strategy, too.
Yeah.
Right? Which leaves executives feeling like they're just dragging progress uphill constantly.
Absolutely. It breeds cynicism, it paralyzes real progress, and it can turn even the most enthusiastic leaders into, well, frustrated firefighters just trying to manage the day-to-day.
And there's a personal cost, too, isn't there? For the leader themselves.
The guidepost touches on that, yeah. Feeling like you're constantly swimming against the tide, maybe having to bend your own values just to survive in that misaligned culture. That's a recipe for burnout.
Okay, so if just talking louder about the vision doesn't work, what's the alternative? This brings us back to culture transmutation. How is it different from just trying to adjust things?
Well, the guidepost defines transmutation as much deeper. It's a permanent shift in the, let's say, the fundamental energy, the purpose, the behaviors that are embedded deep within the organization's operating system.
Its operating system.
It's like
right.
the core code. Kind of, yeah. It's about fundamentally changing how things actually work, not just tinkering with the surface appearance. It's an internal transformation, changing the organizational DNA, if you like.
Right. So instead of pushing the vision harder onto the existing culture.
You shift your focus. You start examining the underlying systems, the structures, the processes that create the culture.
Okay, so what are the kinds of questions leaders should be asking themselves if they want to start thinking systemically like this?
The guidepost offers some really good ones, like quite directly. Where are our current systems actually working against the values we claim to believe in?
That's a confronting question.
It can be. Or do our hiring practices, our performance reviews, or leadership development programs, do they really support the kind of vision we're trying to build?
Looking at those core HR processes.
Exactly. And maybe the most telling one. What do our routine meeting structures, our everyday communication norms, even our informal team rituals, what do they teach people inadvertently about what's really valued around here?
Ooh, that's powerful. Because you can say one thing, but if the meeting always runs late or only certain people get to speak, that teaches a different lesson.
Precisely. Actions, or in this case, the systems speak much louder than words on a poster.
So the core idea here is that when you genuinely weave the vision into these fundamental structures and processes,
Then the culture doesn't need to be forced. It starts to shift more organically. The system itself begins to invite and reinforce the desired behaviors and values.
like with Malcolm, how did he apply this?
Well, the guidepost says he realized the talks weren't working. So he stopped just talking and started doing. He actually collaborated with his frontline nurses to redesign things.
Redesign what, specifically?
How decisions were made, for instance. How successes aligned with the vision were celebrated and recognized. How feedback was gathered, and crucially, how it was acted upon.
So co-creating the new system with the people involved.
Exactly. And the result, as the guidepost highlights, was that people started to genuinely feel the vision, to live it. It wasn't just something abstract they heard about. It became part of their daily work experience.
Okay, so that's the shift. From aspirational to operational. How does that happen more broadly? How does a strategic vision become the culture?
The guidepost breaks this down really effectively by looking at those key organizational processes. It says the vision becomes culture when it's clearly visible in, say, how you hire people.
Are you looking for alignment from the start?
Right, how you onboard them, how you promote them, are you elevating people who embody the vision, and then how do you measure success? Are your KPIs actually tracking progress towards the strategic goals, or are they still focused on old metrics?
That's a big one. Measuring what matters.
Huge. And then a real test. How is the vision protected when things get tough? When there's pressure, stress? Does the vision get sidelined, or does it remain the guiding principle?
That moment of truth. When the pressure's on, that's when you see the real culture, isn't it?
Yeah. It really is. And the guidepost also flags things like what gets rewarded, genuinely rewarded, not just lip service, whose opinions are actively sought out and valued, and what's the fundamental approach to leadership? Is it command and control, or something more aligned with the stated vision?
So it sounds like the leader's role shifts. It's less about being the vision enforcer.
And more about being the architect, the weaver, someone who integrates the vision so deeply into the organization's fabric, its DNA, that it becomes indispensable. It's just how things are done.
Okay. So for you listening right now, maybe grappling with some of these feelings of misalignment, what are some practical first steps? How can you start this transmutation process?
Well, the guidepost offers a very concrete 4 action item. It suggests starting small. Identify just one specific area, one point of cultural fiction you've noticed something that clearly clashes with your values or the vision you hold.
Just one thing to start with.
And then dig a bit deeper. Ask yourself, what's the underlying system or maybe the core belief that's actually holding this friction point in place?
Getting to the root cause.
Exactly. And then think about action. What's one small conversation you could initiate? Or one minor tweak to a structure, maybe even just a micro shift in a daily routine. Something that could begin to nudge that one area back towards alignment.
They give an example, don't they, around inclusion.
Yeah, it's a good one. If inclusion is a stated value, but you notice, say, certain voices are consistently missing when key decisions get made.
The typical response might be just to remind people, be more inclusive.
Right. But the transmutation approach would be different. It would involve actually redesigning the process. How is input gathered? How are decisions communicated? Ensuring that diverse voices are structurally included, not just hoped for.
So you change the system, not just the exhortation.
Precisely. And the emphasis is on testing these small changes, experimenting, seeing what happens, getting feedback, iterating, and then gradually embedding what works into the standard way of doing things.
Yeah.
It's evolution, not necessarily revolution overnight.
That feels more manageable. The guidepost also includes a journal prompts section, right, to encourage more personal reflection.
Yes, and these are really useful for digging into your own experience. It prompts you to think about what part of your organization's current culture feels most out of sync with your leadership vision.
Where's the biggest gap for you personally?
And then, where are you personally feeling like you have to overcompensate? Where are you working extra hard because the system itself isn't designed to support the values you hold?
That's insightful. Identifying where you're propping up a broken system.
Yeah, and it asks you to imagine, what would transmutation, real deep change, not just surface stuff, actually look like in your specific context?
What would be fundamentally different?
And finally, the prompt encourages you to pinpoint one system, one practice, maybe even just one small ritual that you could start to shift starting now to better reflect what you truly stand for.
These are really thought-provoking questions. They definitely push beyond just complaining about the culture toward thinking about how to actively shape it.
Absolutely, because ultimately, as the guidepost kind of summarizes in its looking ahead bit, this whole idea of linking strategic vision and culture transmutation, it's really about operationalizing authenticity.
Operationalizing authenticity. I like that phrase.
It's about making your core values so deeply woven into the fabric of the organization, its systems, its processes, that they become, and this is their word, unignorable.
Not because they're on a poster, but because they're embedded in how everything works.
Exactly. It's how the organization functions day in, day out.
And looking ahead, the guidepost hints that the next logical step, the next topic, might be around sustainability and retention strategies.
Which makes sense, right?
Totally. Once you achieve that alignment, how do you make sure it sticks? How do you keep the momentum going and retain the people who thrive in that transmuted culture?
Important follow-up. And for anyone listening who wants to dive deeper into this right away, particularly in healthcare. Yeah, the guidepost mentions a related Let's Talk About It deep dive that specifically looks at how nurse executives can align the organization's history, their leadership style, and the underlying systems to create lasting impact. Sounds like a really relevant resource for people in that field.
Good to know. Okay, so as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you to consider. Thinking about everything we've discussed, think about one small system, maybe even a seemingly insignificant one, in your own environment. Could be at work, could be personal, something that subtly undermines a value that's really important to you. What's just one tiny shift you could potentially make starting today to begin its transmutation?